All righty. Great conversation with Peter. And now let's have another keep this good times rolling. We have Joe Emersberger. He is a journalist and author, co-writing Extraordinary Threat, the U.S. Empire, the Media, and 20 Years of Coup Attempts in Venezuela. Joe, welcome to the show, my man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Good. Thank you for having me on. Thank you very much.
No, man, thank you for joining me. One of the interesting things associated with Donald Trump is this kind of pressure that he is most likely, there's a question of where he's going to put pressure around the globe. Now, a deranged Joe Biden has pretended that a new man or a different guy is president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido 2.0, despite the fact that this is outrageous, this is nonsense, this didn't work the last time around. This time around, though, Donald Trump is coming into office. Donald Trump has said he wants to end wars, not start them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to take this kind of kind eye towards Venezuela and Maduro, piggyback on what Joe Biden was doing. Do you think that's going to take place? Or do you think Trump is going to be preoccupied elsewhere? How, from your take, and maybe even from Venezuela's take, I haven't necessarily heard anything out of Venezuela on their let's say their framing, their strategic way of dealing with Donald Trump. But maybe you can go into that for me. Do you consider any kind of difference in the way that Joe Biden was dealing with Maduro versus Trump dealing with Maduro? What are your thoughts?
I think it's too early to tell. It could be. It's quite possible that he'll be significantly even more aggressive than Biden. Mm-hmm. Biden did provide kind of a limited sanctions relief to Venezuela. I think because of the proxy war in Ukraine going bad for them and the pressure it put on global oil supplies, I think that motivated them to ease up a bit on Venezuela because they're preoccupied elsewhere, like you say. So a lot depends. But I mean, Trump's Secretary of State is Marco Rubio, who is absolutely deranged in his hatred for Venezuela. You remember in 2019, it was under Trump that there was a major coup attempt in 2019 at the Colombian border. And during that time, Marco Rubio went there and he posted pictures of the corpse of Colonel Gaddafi, and insinuating that was the same thing that was going to happen to Maduro. I mean, he was really deranged. Yeah, I think it's even more deranged than that, possibly. I would say is that when there was blackouts, probably due to sabotage in Venezuela, there were energy grid having problems. Rubio took to Twitter to say that, to basically with glee, to say thanks to our sanctions, they can't fix the energy grid. And so just delighting in that openly, just a sick, deranged, twisted human being. And he's Trump's Secretary of State. So that obviously is a bad sign. The only thing is that Trump also has a history of turning on his own people, like he did with Bolton recently, like he did with Tillerson, like we did with many others. So how long is Rubio going to last in that role if he becomes inconvenient for Trump in some way? And he's publicly humiliated Marco Rubio before on the during
Little Marco.
Yeah. So he's so Trump is as on having Marco Rubio Secretary of State looks horrible. Trump's track record on Venezuela is also horrific. I mean, he's the one who ramped up the sanctions in 2017 to make them really, really devastating. Obama started the sanctions, but Trump deliberately intensified them in 2017 in a dramatic way to make them much, much worse, and kept going. And then in 2019 went even a step further, recognizing Juan Guaido. But we remember this was when it comes to foreign policy, all the actors in Washington are united. I mean, Bernie Sanders was 100% behind, supportive of Trump's coup attempt in Venezuela, and now he voted for Marco Rubio, knowing what a deranged genocidal because Sanders is the same thing. They're all the same when it comes down to it. They're all the same thing. When it comes to foreign policy, especially, you see that there's no difference. You just had on AOC. She was effusive in thanking the Joe Biden for his leadership.
That is the
Just
range.
no
Yeah.
unscrupulous, absolutely no regard for Palestinian lives whatsoever. Just absolutely unscrupulous. So when it comes to foreign policy, there is no difference. So it's I don't anticipate Trump being radically different. He might be worse. It's hard to say though, because he's so unpredictable and there's so many counter pressures going on other places in the world that might apply pressure. For one thing, there's also Trump's commitment to mass deportation to Venezuela, which requires that he work with the Venezuelan government if he wants to pull that off somehow.
Mhm.
So there's a counter pressure right there in his own platform that might work against him going berserk with. But it's hard to say. Like I said, he's an unpredictable character, and at the end of the day, he has no problem being just maniacal and ruthless. But it's what he thinks is in his own interests, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say he's also transactional.
Yes.
In a way that Democrats aren't. Like, meaning Trump, at the very least, seems to be open to deals in a way that Democrats are just not. In their mind, is like, we're better. We're more, our morals are so much higher than anybody else. So if we're going in a particular direction, by definition, we are self-righteous. Almost by definition, like it's different. Like the way they deal with the stuff is slightly different.
It is somewhat different. You're right. And Trump is unpredictable, and all those things are true. But at the end of the day, I don't see any major changes. I see in the best case, I see just basically continuing Biden's policy. In the worst case, making it even worse, being even more aggressive. My personal opinion is I thought Trump in his first term was so fed so much garbage about Venezuela that in his mind it was just going to collapse because he said boo and everyone's going to go run. And then he realized, and then he basically embarrassed himself and then realized that was going to happen. But on the other hand, if he really learned his lesson, it doesn't seem like that if he appoints Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. So who knows what's going on there. He's an unpredictable character, and you're right, he is somewhat transactional. He's not as his ideology is more just whatever benefits me.
That's fair. No, that's fair take.
Well, who knows? It's hard to say.
And you're right. It could be worse, or it could be status quo on Venezuela, especially if he gets concerned with other issues. Venezuela might be a low priority for him, but we'll see.
Exactly.
I am interested on this notion of immigration because you made a really good point that in order to send back people to Venezuela, on some level, you're going to have to work with Venezuela to do that. Because I don't know how you transport people to Venezuela.
You're not going to work with Edmundo Gonzalez. He's not going to.
Yeah, right. Right. So how does that work, right? Like, so, okay. When people are leaving Venezuela, they are getting on a plane and coming to the U.S., they're getting on a plane going to Mexico. How does that work? Especially
in Venezuela's case, a lot of them, the better off are just getting tourist visas or student visas and overstaying them. But I don't know how much now. It's much more likely that they'll come the same way other people do, right up through Panama, through Panama and Central America, then through Mexico. Yeah, that it's a more onerous path, because if they're lower income people who don't have the option of getting some kind of student visa or tourist visa or something and just overstaying it, right? So I think more people now, and the immigration from Venezuela to U.S. is now significant. It wasn't the case for many years, but now it's become somewhat. I looked at the figures a few years ago, not what some people are claiming, but still, it's pretty significant now. So it's not like it's a tiny percentage of the illegal immigration anymore. So it's pretty big, thanks to U.S. sanctions. So
now, are they walking or is it a bus? Because, like you said, if they're poor, they can't get a flight. It's not like they're getting a flight, or it's not like they're overstaying their visas. So, if they're walking,
basically, through the transportation, through various forms of on ground transportation, right? In some cases, it's some borders they'll have to. Walk, and it's very dangerous, right? That's why you have at the border these horrific things that can happen at the U.S. border sometimes, right? But you basically, a lot of people end up paying coyotes, as they call them, to facilitate, this transfer of people. My family's from Ecuador, and I know a lot of people who've paid $10,000 and a very significant amount for them. and to have their illegal travels through those countries kind of facilitated. And it's very risky because sometimes these people just take the money and do God knows what to just rob you, or there's all sorts of horror stories because you're putting your hands in people who are doing something illegal, and you're trying to trust them, right? So it's a very dangerous thing to do. It's a dangerous way to try to make it into the United States. But people have been doing it.
I'm curious, has it been any reporting on how Maduro is looking at dealing with a Trump administration, or from his point of view, whether it's Trump or Biden, these things are effectively the same?
I think this time it's pretty clear that Maduro has a much better sense of Trump. I think they were they were fed some bad information, thinking they took seriously Trump's isolationist rhetoric. I think the first time he took office, they even as a kind of a token of good faith, they even made a small donation to his inauguration, thinking, this is somebody. Maybe this is somebody because you remember Trump did a lot of isolationist rhetoric, a lot of we're America first. A lot of the America first rhetoric was like, we're not going to be bothering with other countries, right? And so I think Maduro's people inside Maduro's government are convinced that we have a chance here. This might be somebody we can get along with, right? So. And then Trump was dramatically worse than Obama. Yeah. So, but I think this time around, I think they're okay. Like they realize, okay, this guy's kind of nuts. They're always, no matter how bad the administration's been in the United States, no matter how bad the government's been, they've always been open to talking because Venezuela's in a weak position. Mm-hmm. They can't. They're not Russia, right? They don't have the option of militarily asserting themselves against the United States, but so they have to be open to dialogue with whoever, no matter how bad they are. So that's the same, but I don't see the same naivete. They weren't as naive this time around. They've seen what Trump was, so they don't have to take. They know what all of us know, that he's not somebody you can predict very easily. So you got to
explain something to me. The sanctions that are being applied, Venezuela doesn't have the capability of working with or trading with other governments in the region. Because I was talking to someone about Cuba at one point, and I guess I had the same question with them. I mean, there are other countries in the world other than the United States to trade with. The sanctions themselves, how the sanctions themselves preventing trade from, let's say, Russia or China. I know those are much further away, but just for sake of the argument, or for that matter, the countries that are in the region themselves. How I know the U.S. is a dominant force in the region and a dominant country. Right. Why do the sanctions prevent Venezuela from getting, let's say, various goods from other countries? And go into that for me. Like, how are the sanctions preventing them from getting trade elsewhere?
Yeah, what all stems from is from the power of the U.S. financial system, the dominance of the U.S. financial system. There's a very good interview that Ben Norton did with Andres Arauz, who's a former head of the Central Bank of Ecuador, and he explained when two countries, let's say Argentina and Chile, they want to do trade with each other. The U.S. financial system is so dominant that even though it's trade just between those two countries, the flow of money ends up inevitably going through the United States financial system. Yeah, because they have to get money and they have to send the money to here. The flow of money is very indirect, and it ends up, even if it travels briefly through the U.S. financial system, that already gives the United States an opportunity to stick their nose in and say, we have the right to block this, or to start launching lawsuits and stuff. In recent years back, several years ago, that a U.S. judge was able to basically sanction Argentina because the bonds that the Argentinian government was unable to pay, they were held up in the U.S. financial system, therefore subject to U.S. law. So the so-called vultures that were trying to shake down Argentina, they had the backing of the U.S. courts. It's because the U.S. financial system is still such a dominant system that it ends up getting its nose, being able to stick its nose everywhere. Now that's starting to change, but not in my opinion, not quickly enough. I mean, Russia and BRICS, they're trying to form alternative payment systems, so you don't have this ridiculous situation that country A wants to trade with country B, and yet for the money has to flow through the U.S. I mean, what the hell's that? It's between country A and country B. U.S. has nothing to do with it. Why should the money even for a nanosecond have to go through the U.S. financial system? But that's the way the system has been set up to work. And like I said, if you watch that interview with Ben Norton and Andras Russ, it gets a very nice explanation of it. And that's what empowers the U.S. That's what makes the U.S. sanctions so powerful. Basically the size and depth of the U.S. financial system is still so big, and that has to be overcome. And it is being overcome with China, with Russia, with BRICS, and all that. But it's kind of not. I would hope
slow.
It's slow. It's slow relative, especially when you consider the damage being done to countries in real time as we speak. The process of adapting to that. Yeah, you always see headlines. This is changing. That, and you do see in the stats. At one point, it was like all central banks had 60% of the reserves in the U.S. financial system is dropping, right? Like, I don't know, maybe it's 57 or something. But it's slow. It's a slow decline. We want to see that go faster.
I mean, what it was like 75%, if not more, at one point. It's down to 50-something% now. As a direct result.
That sounds about right. If you look at a long enough point of time, yeah. It's slow.
Is Venezuela trying to get into BRICS? And has there been any talk about it?
Yeah, it was blocked by Brazil.
Why? Why was it? That's what I thought. That's what I thought. That Lula did something like that. Lula has a hard on for Venezuela, for Maduro.
Yeah.
Why? Why is there this chaos?
In my opinion, he's just straight up being pressured. He just has a gun to his head somehow. He was in prison for a year. I think the most obvious explanation is they leaned on him. Who knows what they have on him or what they've threatened him with? He has a very vicious right wing.
You really think that Lula, after being in jail, I mean, because
I think because he was in jail, I think maybe they broke him down. Maybe they threatened somebody. Who knows? But I think it's naive to think that they are pressuring him very, very strenuously. That's the kind of thing that they managed to put him in jail for a year. I mean, who knows what else they managed to do? Compromise his family or whatever. And he's obviously under huge pressure. And the right wing in Brazil is very vicious. They could get back in power. Who knows what they'll do to him if they get back in power? And it's just a very easy, for the so-called left in Latin America. Sometimes they want to kiss up to Washington by basically throwing Venezuela under the bus, or Nicaragua. Oddly, not as much Cuba, but they'll do that, right? I think in Cuba's case, the sanctions on Cuba have been so brutal. They've been in place for so long. That's one reason that they're so unpopular, that like the sanctions, the whole embargo, that maybe it's not as cool to be in support of them. But anyways, they've Brazil played that role, so that's very, very alarming.
Okay, so the right wing in Brazil is okay with the sanctions being removed for Cuba, but not necessarily, or they don't care as much about the sanctions.
I want to talk about the right wing. The right wing wants to crush Cuba. They hate Cuba, but I'm saying the kind of Lula left, the weak left, the Petro left, the Boric left. Those guys. They really like to throw Venezuela under the bus. They really like to portray themselves as the good left by dumping on Venezuela, and that's their thing. So that's disappointing. But I think it's shows the power of the right, the power of U.S. imperialism, and of course the vicious right wing in these countries. That's what these so-called leftist presidents often feel obliged to do. Rather than take the kind of stand we'd like to see them take a much more courageous stand. But that's
if this level of pressure wasn't applied to Venezuela, I have this firm belief that sometimes pressure being applied to a country creates these kind of fortress country conditions where it's like you're forced to look around to see whether or not there are spies or spooks in every corner, because
Of course.
there most notably may be a spook in every corner.
Mhm.
And so it forces the government to get far more insular in the way that the government behaves. Like, it's kind of hard to have this kind of open government. I mean, hell, let's not even say Venezuela. You can go to Georgia, for example. And the way that they're trying to use this kind of Maidan 2.0 to overthrow the government of Georgia. Okay, well, what does it do from the standpoint of your government when you need to be far more aggressive in ensuring that your government doesn't collapse? It's very difficult to have this kind of open, laissez-faire republic or democracy under those terms. I suspect that Venezuela, on some level, is the same way for this. With Maduro, from your point of view, in an election that was somewhat, how popular is Maduro in Venezuela? Let's start there.
Maduro, I'd say, probably has a very solid 30% of the electorate. That's what he's shown. Like in the worst, when you're able to get 30% of the electorate to vote for you under the horrendous conditions that Venezuela has, that's solid support. That's not fickle support that's gonna go away, tomorrow or something. That's very solid support.
Now, no, please.
Yeah, so that's what I would say. So that's the solid base of support. And if you think about it, in most elections, and we wrote about this in our book, if you look at the actual percentage of the electorate that most so-called democracies, like in Canada and the United States, that's typically what the winning governments get. They usually get less than that. When you look at the actual, because there's so much abstention, right? So when you look at how many people actually show up to vote for them, you're looking at 25, 30% of the electorate that actually support them. So that's the kind of support Maduro has. And frankly, when you talk about democracy, Venezuela is democratic, but part of being a democracy has to be, and this is what a lot of leftists don't want to accept, part of being a democracy means defending yourself against foreign aggression.
Oh, agree.
Being a democracy does not oblige you to let yourself be overthrown. But we have too many so-called leftists who seem to think that, they should just roll over. I
agree. That's why I started with that premise of it creates this kind of fortress country, because you have to defend yourself. I mean, like when Georgia is putting out the cops in order to prevent a Maidan from happening. Okay, well, yeah, they're defending themselves. It's like we believe in sovereignty, and part of sovereignty is being able to defend yourself from foreign threats.
Right.
And the same thing would be true for Venezuela or any other country, Cuba, anywhere else.
Yeah.